Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our community worship with the UUs of Charlottesville. It is so good to see everyone this morning. I'm Dawn Dirks, your worship weaver today. I am so glad to welcome all of you into this virtual sanctuary. Our physical sanctuary was built in 1950 on hilltop land acquired by the church after World War II. We are near the campus of the University of Virginia, whose first buildings were constructed in the early 1800s by enslaved African Americans. And we are on lands which for centuries have been the dwelling place of the Monacan people. We honor all those who dwelt here before and all those whose lives led to this moment of our gathering as a community of memory and hope. I invite our board member, Kelsey Cowger, now to offer her greetings to us all.
Good morning. My name is Kelsey Cowger, and it just makes me so happy to be here today to welcome you all on behalf of the board. I'm in my second term as an at-large board member, and the opportunity to serve the church in this way has just been such a joy in my life. I'm a lifelong UU, third generation, and when I moved to the Charlottesville area in 2016, I tell people I got here on a Saturday, came to church on a Sunday, and just didn't leave. I'm a member of the choir. I'm the UUCville lead for Impact, where I've gotten to see our church members work together to make this real, lasting, positive change in our community. And I also spent last year working on voting rights and ballot access with the UU The Vote team, which I've just never been prouder in my life to be a UU and to be part of this denomination than when I was doing that work in consort with other UUs from across the country. Welcome to worship today. We're just all so glad you're here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelsey. Joining me in our service today are Greg Townsend, Reverend Linda, and Christine Gresser. Behind the curtain, Sean Scally, Bailey Reed, and Caroline Hines are running the show, and we are grateful for the musical gifts of James Smith, Scott DeVoe, and the UUCville Virtual Choir. We thank Lucy Gilbert and Ellie Ransom for their video artistry. And now let us join our hearts and minds in worship now with these words from Anne Hillman. We look with uncertainty beyond the old choices for clear-cut answers to a softer, more permanent aliveness, which is every moment at the brink of death. For something new is being born in us if we but let it. We stand at a new doorway, awaiting that which comes, daring to be human creatures, vulnerable to the beauty of existence, learning to love. Come, let us worship together.
But most of all, we need close on what heart to be together, and with the grace of age we share the wonder of thee, and we believe that growing is an answer. Our lives are full of wonder, and our time is very brief. The death of one among us fills us all with pain and grief. But as we live, so shall we die, and when our lives are done, the memories we shared with friends that we live on and on. And we believe in life and in the strength of love, and we have found a place to be together. We have the right to grow, we have the gift to believe that is within our living is an answer. We seek elusive answers to the questions of this life. We seek to put an end to all the waste of human strife. We search for truth, equality, and blessed peace of mind. And then we come together here to make sense of what we find. And we believe in life and in the strength of love, and we have found our joy being together. And in our search for peace, maybe we'll finally see, even to question truly is an answer. And we believe in life and in the strength of love, and we have found our joy being together. And in our search for peace, maybe we'll finally see, even to question truly is an answer.
Oh, we're the Little Goodwill family. I'm Liam.
I'm Chris.
I'm Nora.
I'm Tori.
I'm Kieran. We've been coming to this church for about 2 years, and what we love about it most is how kind and welcoming the people are and the values it is teaching us.
We light our chops this morning, the symbol of our UU faith.
We gather this hour as people of faith,
with
joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope,
sign of our quest for truth and meaning, in celebration of the life we share together.
We light this chalice to celebrate Unitarian Universalism.
This is a church of the open mind. This is a church of the helping hands. This is a church of the loving hearts.
Our congregation's chalice has been lit and will have its own screen throughout the service. If you have a chalice at your home, please light it now.
Good morning, everyone. This week, there was an anniversary. It's important to us all, but it may not be the anniversary that you knew was happening. 60 years ago, on May 12th, 1961, our Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations was created when the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church of America finally voted to consolidate, to marry, to become one. America's leading religious journal at the time, the Christian Century, called it the most thorough sounding of the views of a religious people in modern times. By sounding, they meant that for many years before the decision to unite was made, in meetings and info sessions and votes, members of every Unitarian and Universalist congregation throughout the nation were asked to share their views about this. And they did. One Back Bay matron was heard to sniff that Universalists were nothing but Baptists who could read. And Universalists complained that Unitarians didn't feel like they'd heard a good sermon unless they didn't quite understand it themselves. Sounds like those are interesting times. Greg Townsend, could you tell us a little more of this story?
Happy to. Thank you, Reverend Linda. There are so many parts of the story of what led up to the 1961 birth of the UEUA. Universalism in North America was a populist movement in the time before and after the American Revolution. It swept westward with the great American migration of the 19th century. On the other hand, Unitarians went back to the Mayflower, and except for a few Western outposts and college towns, they remained largely in New England. But for more than a century before the 1961 merger, they had shared many of the same ministers and views on religion and society. They even had headquarters in Boston across the street from each other, and leaders got into serious conversations about merger after World War II. But then many of the Unitarian and Universalist auxiliaries, like women's groups, Sunday school, men's groups, youth groups, social witness groups, had begun to collaborate and work closely together. But of course, being good UUs, everyone had to discuss the matter of formal merger for another decade. There were complexities to a union. There were differences between the two denominations, organizational, cultural, and theological. There were misconceptions and stereotypes of one another, and everyone feared the loss of identity. While a simple name like United Liberal Church might have seemed a more logical and marketable name, it was clear that both denominational names had to be included in the new name, which to this day remains a bit awkward and lengthy. Unitarian Universalist Association. And so we settled, at least among ourselves, for calling ourselves UUs. As merger grew closer, a host of issues and their advocates grew more intense. Before final ratification, no less than 23 amendments were made to the merger agreement. The two General Assemblies met separately. They met together. They met late into the night. Finally, in a joint session, an estimated 2,000 UUs gathered in Symphony Hall, Boston, for a service of celebration. Two pulpits were used, that of the Oxford Church, in which Universalist Hosea Ballou had been ordained, and that of the Unitarian Federal Street Church, from which Unitarian William Ellery Channing had preached. At that celebration, a hymn was sung, which had been written 30 years earlier in the hopes of the merger becoming a reality. I won't sing it. You should be ever grateful for that. But these are some of the lines. As tranquil streams that meet and merge and flow as one to seek the sea, our kindred hearts and minds unite to build a church that shall be free. An important part of the telling of the story of the formation of the UU is this. It was in the youth movements of the two denominations that the greatest influences for a new united church was found. The young adult and youth groups have been working together for many decades, and by the 1950s, they were ready to make their partnership formal. While the adults were spending years talking, the youth organizations began the work of consolidation. They merged in 1953, becoming the Liberal Religious Youth. 10 years later, those youth were among the adults who voted for the UUA consolidation. Hymn 318 in our hymnal, We Would Be One, was originally written as a youth anthem. Anthony Wright, the first executive director of the Consolidated Liberal Religious Youth, wrote the words in 1952 for the youth groups uniting. Let us all give thanks to the wisdom of our ancestor youth, who had the vision to bring us all together. And let us sing their anthem now to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the UUA and the 70th anniversary of the Consolidated UU movement.
This congregation, Unitarian Universalists of Charlottesville, has been my spiritual home for the majority of the past 2 decades. I have known many of you for this entire time, and I am deeply grateful for the relationships that we have built together. Watching my children and yours grow up here into thoughtful, ethical adults has been a gift that I cannot adequately describe. UUC and all of you mean the world to me. Today is a day when we invite everyone to make a special donation to the work of the Charlottesville Immigrant Freedom Fund. The CIFF is a nonprofit organization that helps immigrant families pay for legal representation and posts bond for detainees. Your contributions allow hundreds of children and parents to more easily pay rent, buy food, and be reunited with detained loved ones. Let's hear now from 2 leaders of the Charlottesville Immigrant Freedom Fund, Natalie Romero and Frank Valdez.
The Charlottesville Immigrant Freedom Fund, or CIF, helps immigrant families pay for legal representation in ICE bond. As COVID spread through immigrant detention centers in Virginia, CIF has focused on posting bonds to free as many people as we could. The average bond amount is over $5,000, with as high as $10,000 to $20,000. We bonded out 42 of our neighbors since the pandemic. With the urgency of COVID in detention, we put our legal support on hold to bond out urgent cases. With immigrant detention courts opening up, we have an increase in requests to help pay attorney and legal fees. We're receiving applications on behalf of children in the Charlottesville area who have real chances of securing legal status and protection from deportation, only if they can pay their legal representation. We're also seeing single mothers, survivors of violence and trafficking, whose bills are greater than their income, and they cannot pursue their asylum cases without financial support of their neighbors. All of them could be on the path to citizenship and healing if they could access the necessary representation to secure the visas that they already qualify for. Attorney fees range from $2,000 to $10,000. We have a waiting list of applications from local families totaling over 30,000 and receive requests weekly.
We hope that you all have been following the situation with migrant children at our border. It is indeed horrifying, challenging, and troubling. As CIF has always said, the border is also here. The border in Seville are the dozens of single moms and children who are having to choose between paying their needs or hiring an attorney. There are innocent dads who have been in detention in Farmville and Caroline County throughout the COVID nightmare, but have absolutely no family resources to pay their bonds. For our undocumented neighbors, securing legal representation to obtain a visa can be transformational. It can provide stability, a path to permanent residence, citizenship, and decrease the perpetual fear of an ICE detention and deportation. By supporting this urgent needs for funds, you stand with your community and perhaps with the family living just across the street. To be honest, we are broke, but we give to cases directly. Again, we now have a waitlist of over $30,000 in applications for legal support. Beyond anything, we would like to invite your congregation to join us in our efforts, help us raise awareness, and help sustain us with funds and resources. We thank you for listening, for your previous support, and hope that you and your congregation consider supporting our cause. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie and Frank. Today and during the rest of May, we can make gifts to CIFF by texting a donation or giving at our webpage at uucharlottesville.org. And of course, you are always invited to give to this congregation to support our many ministries that offer pastoral support, religious education, and promote our UU values in the world. We are grateful for the gifts you make to sustain the ongoing story of the ministry of this congregation. We give thanks for all that you love, and we encourage you to be generous in putting your love into action with your gifts. May your donation, like your love, go out into the world. Please join me in dedicating the offering now, saying these words. We accept your gifts with gratitude. May we use them wisely and for the highest good.
Amen. Thank you, James, for that beautiful music. In May and on into June, our theme is about sharing stories, discovering the power in stories and how we tell them, which ones we choose to tell, and the ones that are hidden. It's kind of like creating a mosaic when you tell each other's stories or listen to each other's stories and you piece together the many snippets to create the bigger picture. Or it's like a movie that has been designed with flashbacks and side stories that keep coming together and then separating. And each time they add a new aha moment of deeper understanding. Today, I want us to consider a little bit about how we can start to tell and retell your story, the story of the Unitarian Universalist congregation in Charlottesville. Once upon a time, there was a small group of idealistic and humanistic people who came together, even with little encouragement. They were seeking to do the best as commitment to reason and ideals of democracy. Commitment like their namesake, Thomas Jefferson, and possibly having some of the same flaws he had. Struggling to build a sanctuary and a community and a program of ministry, balancing high ideals with shadows. High ideals, lovers of reason and intellect, choosing land on the highest hill, preaching human ethics and community, all the while arguing over things and trying to find funds for keeping going and wrestling with the shadows of a heritage of racism and sexism in a southern state, still trying to be genteel and polite while living in a never-ending legacy of the separatist confederacy. Your story is a story that has faced moments of serious crises, often aligned with those facing our nation. In the 1960s, one of your ministers, an activist, draped the building in black crepe after the bombing in Birmingham and marched in Selma and preached racial justice. But his actions disturbed some of the members who weren't quite as activist as him. In the 90s, you were spending more than a decade bringing the congregation along to figure out what it means to have love for people who are lesbian, gay, bi, trans, queer. And again, in 2017 till now, you have been in a crisis, reverberating from the national trauma of racism, dealing with disagreements within yourselves about leadership, about money, about the direction. All of this has been along with almost 80 years of wonderful ministry and programs and caring community, and yes, uncompassionate behavior at times, and serious disagreements that led to breakups. The arc of your current story, in some ways, came to a turning point, a peak, about 3 years ago. The moment when your church administrator at the time received a very nasty, anonymous note. And the shock effects of that note were so strong that your long planned for 75th anniversary celebration was canceled. And instead there was a service to reflect on what this all meant. If that moment was a pivot or a fulcrum in your current life, how can we understand what's happening now on the other side? How is the story going to unfold? Will you ever find out who wrote the racist note? Does it matter? And will you ever be able to have a true celebration of your anniversary, your whole story of you? At the moment of crisis in 2018, your minister, Reverend Eric Wickstrom, reminded you then that the congregation's first settled minister, Malcolm Sutherland, said this on the occasion of your very first worship service in your brand new sanctuary more than 70 years ago. Sutherland said it was important to realize the fact that in all its beauty, the building is not the church. It was designed to serve a church. It was designed to inspire a church, but the building is not the church. He said, you are the church. So he said, we're not opening a church this morning, we're opening a home for our church. The physical home is worthy of our highest aspirations. And the question is, can we prove ourselves worthy of our new home? If it is to be a beautiful church, as beautiful as its home, it will be because you are living beautiful lives. And how we need beauty today, there is ugliness and distortion enough. Now I want you to pay attention. He said in that sermon that you, the congregation, have to prove yourselves worthy of the beauty of your home. And then a few years later, when he was leaving for another congregation, in his last sermon, Sutherland said the congregation needed to ask itself, you guys needed to ask yourselves, why don't we? Why don't we do the things we know we should? Why aren't we being the kind of people we know we want to be? Why don't we take care of the kind of risks we know our faith is calling us to? Why don't we really trust each other more than we do? Why don't we recognize how much we ourselves have to change instead of focusing so much attention on the way other folks are falling short? Why don't we? An interesting final sermon. I wonder how that very first ministry framed your sense of yourself, your identity. And I know none of you were there, but I'm wondering how much of that is in the water. He offered the ideal that you have to strive to offer beauty to an ugly world, and he chided the congregation for not being better at it. I wonder, why did that message resonate with Reverend Wickstrom a few years ago when there was a crisis here? Now, I acknowledge I am an imperfect person and I am only me, but I do have some impressions I want to share to you coming from outside of your community and trying to get to know you and see you and hear your story. It feels to me like the story that has been told about you, and it wasn't just that first story or the last version, it was in many conflicts throughout the 75 years. The story that has been sort of sneaking in on you is this: Your ideals are beautiful, but you aren't good at living up to that. You are failing at being worthy. That's what I'm hearing underlying this. The story says to me that you're being told you're a little too ugly to be as beautiful as your ideals. And I wonder if that is what has been in the water for 80 years. When so many good things have been happening, and so many people have been caring and giving and questing, and people have tried so hard. And when difficulties and breakups happen, your congregation beats itself up and wonders why it's not as beautiful as it should be, instead of loving yourself for going on, discouraged and not giving up. And all the while, I wonder, have you been doubting somewhere deep down inside that you have beauty or worth or dignity? In some ways, this reveals a little bit of the paradox that our Unitarian and Universalist consolidation has had to wrestle with about our theology of human nature. Historically, Unitarian theology posits that it's in the power of humans. In other words, human beings have the power to use their reason and self-improvement to work on themselves and society to make things more perfect and more worthy. And Universalism says it's in the love of the universe, the love of the Creator for the creation, that we are who we are. And we are loved in spite of ourselves and inspired by that love to do as well as we can and to share that love. Now, this is an oversimplification of the two theologies, and a serious theologian will take me to task, I am sure. And after all, both these ways of looking at the world, Unitarianism and Universalism, came together and reject the idea of original sin, that we are born sinful and need to be saved. And both adopted our first principle, that we affirm the inherent worth and dignity of all. And so when I read the words spoken by Reverend Sutherland, and probably buried into the earliest consciousness of a still very new congregation, I hear the notion that it is on you and that you should feel shame about not being good enough, not being beautiful enough to live up to the high ideals you espouse. It is like being told the love our faith has for you is conditional on how good or beautiful you are. Now, I speak with some hesitancy, humility, because I am reflecting on your stories as you've been telling me ever since I got here in August. They're not my stories, but listening to your stories and the struggles and what's been going on and how you feel about it, and then reading that early sermon and hearing it reflected again and again throughout the decades, I want to suggest something very gently, I'm wondering about something. I'm wondering if it's time to reconsider that maybe a subtle assumption is lying beneath your birth story. A subtle assumption that Sutherland, or maybe the society at that time, the 1950s, were telling you that you are people who are not as beautiful as your ideals, and you do need to do more. Even if you'd never heard those early sermons, even if you missed it when Reverend Wickstrom quoted from that sermon 3 years ago, I wonder if it is somewhere in the community unconsciousness, in its sense of yourself. Could you consider another version of you? Instead of saying that it's up to you to pull yourself up on your bootstraps and be better, be as good as your dreams are, instead, try this version. The Buddhists say all existence is filled with pain and suffering. And we know you are human. And we believe that the creation is beautiful, which means you are beautiful. And that it is your beauty It is exactly your beauty that keeps you trying to find your way in the world, even though the ugliness has harmed you and harmed everyone you know. How do we tell the story that makes a difference? I mean, like, how would a child feel whose birth story, whose story he's told from the time he's little is that he's not being a good boy, that his home is beautiful, but he's not living up to the ideals of his parents? For me, that's kind of a form of child abuse, because children, I believe, are born with a capacity to be loving and to be loved. So I want to suggest to you that you try to tell your story in a new way and think of yourself differently. And I'm not talking about anybody covering up your missteps and squabbles. You all have had those. And I'm not talking about denying that you are imperfect and fallible. After all, being imperfect and fallible is being human. And the more I hear your stories, the more I am aware that you have a lot of talking to do with each other, to be honest with each other, to be able to heal over your wounds. I am not talking about changing or covering up your history. I am talking about telling the old stories with a new framing, with some understandings, with empathy, with compassion, with the wisdom of a sage who views life in a more compassionate and universal way. And then use that compassion as you continue to write the next episodes in your unfolding narrative of this beloved congregation. As if you are beautiful and as if you can do the good you seek. Imperfectly, yes, that's what humans are, but always worthy of love, because that's also who you are, lovable. So what would a new version of your story be, and how might it go forward? Let me give it a try, and each of you can try on your own. My story of this congregation. Once upon a time, there were people, wonderful people, who believed in love and reason and freedom from negative forces in society. They struggled and tried to find their way, and each time they fell down, they were beautiful and caring enough to get up again, to move forward, to catch up to where the Spirit was pulling them. They were being human. And even though some people made them wonder over and over if it was good enough, they decided that they loved being human. So this group decided in 2021 to remember their past, but to write a new future. They realized they didn't need to forgive each other for being human. They began to love each other for being human. They didn't have to forgive each other for being human. Rather, they needed to love each other for being human, for being beautiful enough to see beauty and hope in a world that was so hard on them, to be able to come together, to heal hurts within themselves, hurts that they'd caused or had been caused to them, hurts in their congregation, and then to come together to care about ending hurt in the world. They prepared for a developmental minister to support them on their journey towards strength and well-being. And after all this, and on February 28th, 2023, they had the most wonderful celebration of their 80th anniversary, when they could rejoice and be thanked by their children and grandchildren. And when the larger community around them came to them and said, "Well done. Thank you for being such a wonderful part of the justice healing work of Charlottesville and Albemarle County, of Unitarian Universalism, and our nation." That's one way the story could go. Greg mentioned earlier the hymn "As Tranquil Streams" that was sung in anticipation of and then for the consolidation of the Unitarians and the Universalists. The closing lines are these: prophetic church, the future waits your liberating ministry. Go forward in the power of love and proclaim the truth that makes us free. I have gotten to know you all, and I think it is very possible for you to write a new story, to find a new way to speak of your history, to feel yourself differently and have deep compassion and clearer insight. And to see that your story is, yes, it's about the individuals who make up this congregation, and it is much more than that. It's about the whole congregation. It's about the liberal faith of Unitarian Universalism. It's about the story of the human journey from Eden and then beyond. And you can write a story that includes the themes not of shame and shortcomings, but of hope and love and persistence. Yours can be a story that isn't about breaking up and then reconciling and then breaking up again, but it can be a story of discovering your beauty and being present and connected through the joys and the sorrows of this world of life. Yours can be a story about being one and all together, spreading a liberating message of love and justice. Yours can be a story that there is always more love.
There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere, somewhere. There is more hope somewhere, somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more. There is more peace. There is more peace. There is more joy somewhere. There is more joy somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more joy. There is more peace. There is more love somewhere.
And so now we extinguish our chalices, but we do this keeping alive the light within our hearts. And I offer you blessing with these words from Elizabeth Tarbox. She wrote, I say that ours is a story of faith and hope and love. I say our story is about our need for one another that binds us together, that brings us laughing and limping into relationships and keeps us at it when we otherwise might despair at the fix we're in. I say that the story is about the holy we need, the eternal beyond our comprehension. And one place we can find it is here, working and worshiping together. And I say our story has a transcendent value, worthy of our loyalty, upon which we may set our hearts. And that story is the story of love.